The story of China's rise is one of the most extraordinary transformations in human history. In less than half a century, a nation once defined by poverty, isolation, and internal turmoil reshaped itself into an economic giant that now stands at the center of global power. This is not merely a story about factories, trade, or statistics. It is a story about ambition, discipline, political control, cultural resilience, and a long-term vision that few nations have ever dared to execute. How did China move from a largely agrarian society to the world's manufacturing hub? How did a country that once struggled to feed its population become the second-largest economy on Earth? And what decisions, sacrifices, and strategies turned China into a modern superpower? This is the rise of China. This is the economic revolution that changed the balance of the world. Let's begin. Before China became a symbol of economic power, it was a nation fighting for survival. For much of the 20th century, China was not a rising giant, but a wounded civilization struggling under the weight of history, war, and internal chaos. At the beginning of the 1900s, China was overwhelmingly rural, with more than 80% of its population living in villages, relying on subsistence farming. While productivity was low, technology was outdated, and life expectancy was painfully short, making survival the primary goal for the majority of citizens rather than prosperity. The fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 marked the end of imperial rule, but it did not bring stability. As China descended into decades of fragmentation with warlords controlling vast territories, weak central authority, and an economy crippled by corruption and constant conflict, foreign powers exploited this weakness, carving out spheres of influence, controlling ports, trade routes, and key industries, leaving China treated less like a sovereign nation and more like a market to be exploited, eroding national pride and making economic independence a distant dream. The situation worsened with the Japanese invasion in the 1930s, as the Second Sino-Japanese War devastated the country, destroyed cities, collapsed infrastructure, killed millions, plummeted agricultural production, and caused widespread famine, crushing any hope of economic development. After World War II, China was exhausted. But peace did not last as the Chinese Civil War resumed between nationalists and communists, ending in 1949 with the Communist Party under Mao Zedong emerging victorious, founding the People's Republic of China, which symbolized unity and liberation while marking the start of a radical economic experiment. The new government believed rapid industrialization was key to national strength, adopting a centrally planned economy inspired by the Soviet model, eliminating private ownership, collectivizing land, and controlling production, prices, and distribution. Initial optimism emerged with new factories, literacy campaigns, and basic healthcare improvements. But the system was deeply flawed, as central planners lacked accurate information, set unrealistic production targets, removed incentives, and left farmers unmotivated, resulting in massive inefficiency. This reached catastrophe during the Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s, when the government attempted to transform China into an industrial powerhouse almost overnight by forcing farmers into communes, imposing steel production targets on villages without technical expertise, and diverting agricultural labor to useless industrial projects, resulting in one of the deadliest famines in human history that killed tens of millions, collapsed the economy, and severely damaged trust in the system. Yet the most powerful force shaping China's future was as China remained united, the state maintained control, the population adapted, survival instincts hardened into discipline, and suffering became normalized, creating an unspoken understanding that national strength required sacrifice. The Cultural Revolution in the 1960s further destabilized the nation, closing schools, persecuting intellectuals, and replacing expertise with ideology, while China became even more isolated from the global economy. By the mid-1970s, China stood at a crossroads with an enormous population, weak economy, vast territory, backward technology, a rigid political system, and resilient people. When Mao Zedong died in 1976, China was poor, isolated, and exhausted, with per capita income lower than many African nations, nearly non-existent foreign investment, and minimal global trade participation. Yet beneath this bleak reality lay the foundation for future rise. a disciplined population, a strong central state, and a deep historical memory of humiliation and survival, as China had learned what weakness looked like and would never forget, setting the stage for a transformation that would shock the world. China's transformation did not begin with a sudden explosion of wealth, but quietly, cautiously, and almost invisibly. And when Mao Zedong died in 1976, China was at its lowest point in decades, unified politically but economically stagnant, with ideology dominating decision-making for years and producing devastating results, as factories made goods no one needed. Farms struggled to feed the population. Innovation was discouraged, and initiative punished, leaving the Communist Party facing a historic dilemma of whether to continue the same ideological path and risk permanent poverty, or change course and risk losing control, out of which emerged Deng Xiaoping, a pragmatic, disciplined, and results-focused leader whose philosophy encapsulated by the saying that it did not matter whether a cat was black or white as long as it caught mice, would redefine China, emphasizing that ideology should serve development, not replace it, and economic growth, not political purity, would determine national strength, marking the first acknowledgement by leadership since 1949 that the existing system was failing. Reform could not be sudden, as the scars of chaos were fresh and stability sacred. So instead of dismantling socialism, Deng reshaped it, beginning with agriculture through the household responsibility system, which allowed individual families to farm plots while meeting state quotas and selling surplus for profit, immediately increasing output, easing food shortages, and raising rural incomes for the first time in a generation, signaling that controlled experimentation worked. Next, reforms targeted state-owned enterprises, introducing performance incentives, profit retention, and managerial autonomy to improve efficiency and productivity without privatization, followed by the boldest move of all, opening China to the world through special economic zones in 1980, such as Shenzhen, which allowed foreign investment, market pricing, private enterprise, and export-driven growth, transforming the city from a small fishing village into a booming industrial hub attracting foreign capital, technology, and management expertise while providing labor, land, and political stability, leading to an explosion of exports and manufacturing capacity, as China learned how the global economy functioned while maintaining strict Communist Party control, allowing markets to operate but keeping politics tightly centralized with no multi-party democracy, using economic growth as a source of legitimacy, improving living standards, and reducing public dissatisfaction, yet also creating tension as inflation rose, inequality widened, coastal regions advanced faster than inland provinces, and corruption increased, culminating in the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests, which demanded political reform, transparency, and accountability, leading to a violent crackdown that shocked the world and slowed foreign investment. Though internally the party prioritized political stability over international condemnation, continuing economic reform while tightening control, a strategy reinforced during Deng's 1992 Southern tour, where he publicly endorsed market reforms, warned against ideological rigidity, and made development the absolute priority, after which reforms accelerated with private business expansion, township and village enterprise growth, and rapid urbanization, as millions moved from farms to factories and infrastructure multiplied, connecting cities and ports, with China committing fully to a unique hybrid system in which the state guided direction, the market handled execution, and the party controlled power, defying Western economic theories as neither purely capitalists nor traditionally socialists, aiming for one purpose: national strength. By the late 1990s, China had fundamentally changed, no longer isolated, starving, or stagnant. Yet it was not yet a superpower, preparing to enter the global system on its own terms, not as a follower, but as a force, with the economic revolution well underway and only gaining momentum. By the turn of the 21st century, China was no longer an experiment, but a machine in motion, with factories spreading across the coastline like steel forests, highways connecting industrial zones to ports, and containers moving in endless lines toward ships bound for every corner of the world. As the transformation was deliberately engineered, with China's greatest advantage being scale, with a population exceeding 1 billion, providing a labor force unmatched in human history. Millions of rural workers migrating to cities each year, willing to work long hours for wages that were unthinkably low by Western standards, irresistible to multinational corporations. Yet cheap labor alone did not create the world's factory, as the Chinese state played a decisive role with local governments competing aggressively to attract investment, offering tax incentives, cheap land, and fast-track approvals, building infrastructure in advance, including ports, power plants, roads, and industrial parks designed for long-term export growth. While foreign companies arrived in waves from Japan, South Korea, Europe, and the United States to produce for the world, with China absorbing their technology, management techniques, and production systems, turning joint ventures into classrooms and assembly lines into training grounds, allowing Chinese firms over time to do everything themselves, beginning with simple products like toys, shoes, and clothing with low margins and high volume, then moving to higher complexity goods such as appliances, machinery, and electronics, encouraged by the government's export-oriented policies, competitive currency management, and export rebates, manufacturing comparative advantage rather than waiting for it, culminating in China joining the World Trade Organization in 2001, which expanded market access and forced trade reforms, accelerating exports, multiplying factories, deepening supply chains, and creating entire cities specialized in single industries, increasing efficiency, reducing costs, speeding production, improving quality, enabling Western companies to outsource at an unprecedented scale, providing cheaper goods for consumers, and soaring corporate profits, while China quietly shifted the balance of power, accumulating trade surpluses and foreign exchange reserves that became strategic tools through investments like U.S. Treasury bonds, reshaping society as urbanization surged. Megacities rose from farmland. Migrant workers sacrificed comfort for opportunity. Harsh working conditions persisted with long hours and limited rights, yet poverty rates collapsed. Rural incomes rose, education access improved, and consumption expanded as China exported not just goods, but stability, even as inequality widened between booming coastal regions and lagging inland provinces, prompting massive state investment in high-speed rail, power grids, telecommunications, and logistics, creating infrastructure at an unprecedented scale, extending beyond domestic borders as Chinese ports became among the busiest in the world. Shipping expanded globally, trade routes stretched across continents, and the economy grew at near double-digit rates for years, though dependence on exports created vulnerability exposed by the 2008 global financial crisis, leading China to respond with overwhelming force through massive stimulus, infrastructure expansion, and credit growth, stabilizing the economy while demonstrating that manufacturing alone was insufficient for long-term power, necessitating increased value, technological advancement, and domestic consumption. All while global supply chains were restructured, industrial jobs disappeared in developed nations, economic gravity shifted eastward, and China integrated deeply into the world economy without submission, learning global rules while preparing to reshape them, focusing next on control over technology, finance, and influence, no longer catching up, but positioning itself to lead. Economic growth alone does not create a superpower, as power requires control, and by the early 2010s, China understood this truth clearly, having gained decades of manufacturing dominance that generated wealth, but also exposed vulnerabilities as reliance on foreign technology, external markets, and global financial systems left the nation subject to forces beyond its control, prompting the next phase of China's rise to focus on one objective: strategic independence, with leadership redefining development so that success was measured not solely by growth rates, but by innovation, technological mastery, and global influence, mobilizing state resources decisively through ambitious industrial policies like Made in China 2025, targeting advanced sectors, including robotics, artificial intelligence, aerospace, semiconductors, biotechnology, and electric vehicles, with the goal not being participation but dominance. While state-owned banks provided cheap credit, research institutions expanded, universities were reoriented toward applied science and engineering, and private companies were encouraged but always aligned with national priorities, creating state capitalism at its most refined. As Chinese tech firms rose rapidly in telecommunications, e-commerce, and digital payments, transforming daily life, leapfrogging traditional systems with mobile technology, and treating data as a strategic asset, all under tight political oversight where control was never surrendered. Even as Chinese firms expanded abroad, building infrastructure, acquiring companies, and competing in sensitive sectors, drawing concern from Western nations who increasingly viewed China as a strategic rival. While the Belt and Road Initiative symbolized this shift by investing hundreds of billions of dollars into infrastructure across Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America, connecting regions to Chinese trade networks and gaining political leverage and market access. Even as debt dependency and geopolitical tension grew, and at home, the party tightened its grip to manage economic complexity, rising debt, inequality, and instability, strengthening state-owned enterprises, maintaining control over strategic sectors, and intensifying regulation over finance, media, and technology, with stability remaining the ultimate priority. And under Xi Jinping, power centralized at the top. Long-term planning extended decades into the future, and ideological discipline served economic strategy rather than replaced it, framing China as an alternative path to modernization with economic development without Western-style liberal democracy, growth under centralized authority, and innovation under political supervision, a narrative resonating with many developing nations. While tensions with the West escalated through trade disputes, technology restrictions, and supply chain manipulation, prompting China to accelerate self-reliance, expand domestic chip production, intensify indigenous innovation, and make national resilience policy, demonstrating that the economic revolution had evolved into a strategic contest as China sought security, influence, and recognition as a global leader, laying the foundations of superpower status. While the final question remained, could China sustain this rise without breaking under its own weight? An answer that would define the future. China's rise is often described in terms of numbers: GDP growth, trade surpluses, infrastructure spending, population size. But true superpower status cannot be measured by numbers alone. It is measured by resilience, adaptability, and the ability to shape the world on one's own terms. By the 2020s, China had transformed completely. It was a global manufacturing hub, a technological innovator, a financial powerhouse, and an influential geopolitical actor. Yet, with great power came great complexity. Internally, China faced contradictions that tested its governance. The ocean-Oriental divide remained significant. Coastal megacities thrived, while inland regions lagged behind. Inequality created social pressure, and the government responded with targeted redistribution, infrastructure, investment, and social programs. But gaps persisted. Demographic challenges loomed large. Decades of population control policies had slowed birth rates. An aging population threatened labor supply and increased pressure on social services. Workforce numbers would decline, creating potential bottlenecks in growth and productivity. Debt levels had soared. Local governments, corporations, and households carried record liabilities. Credit fueled growth, but over-reliance on debt created vulnerability to financial crises. The state maintained control, yet systemic risk remained a constant concern. Environmental pressures were intensifying. Rapid industrialization had come at the cost of air, water, and soil quality. Pollution impacted public health and social satisfaction. Climate change added urgency. China responded with ambitious renewable energy investments, but transitioning while sustaining growth proved challenging. Externally, global reactions created strategic friction. Western nations, wary of China's influence, implemented tariffs, technology bans, and strategic containment policies. Alliances formed to counterbalance China's Belt and Road initiatives and regional expansion in the South China Sea. Diplomatic tension became a defining feature of China's global engagement. Yet, China's rise is not solely defined by conflict. Soft power increased through investment in infrastructure, cultural outreach, and global institutions. Chinese language programs, media networks, and educational scholarship spread influence. The country projected an image of a confident, capable, and forward-looking nation. Technology remained central to global ambitions. Artificial intelligence, 5G networks, electric vehicles, and high-speed rail positioned China as a leader in the industries of the future. Investment in research and development became a national obsession, with clear alignment to strategic goals. China also embraced digital governance, Data collection, digital monitoring, and platform integration enabled efficiency, stability, and control. These tools supported economic growth while maintaining social order. They became both an advantage and a source of scrutiny by the global community. China's rise has reshaped global supply chains, trade patterns, and financial systems. The world is interconnected in ways that leave no nation untouched by China's policies. Its manufacturing, technology, and infrastructure investments ripple across continents, influencing markets, politics, and economies. But the nation must navigate a delicate balance. Economic modernization depends on consumption, innovation, and global integration. Political stability depends on control, ideology, and disciplined governance. International influence depends on engagement, cooperation, and negotiation. A single misstep could disrupt decades of progress. Superpower status is not a static achievement. It is a continuous effort to adapt, manage risks, and maintain credibility. China's leadership knows this. Its long-term planning spans decades, preparing for scenarios that might challenge growth, social stability, or global positioning. Yet China's story also demonstrates the extraordinary power of vision, discipline, and resilience. The transformation from a poor, isolated, agrarian society to an economic and technological giant in just 40 years is unparalleled. Hundreds of millions of lives were lifted from poverty. Cities were rebuilt. Technology was mastered. Infrastructure reached a scale unimaginable a generation ago. The economic revolution that began with Deng Xiaoping's reforms has matured into a comprehensive strategy for national power. Every policy, every investment, every technological push is linked to the goal of securing China's position in the global order. For the world, this rise brings both opportunity and challenge. Trade, technology, and investment create possibilities for cooperation. Competition, territorial claims, and political differences generate tension. How nations respond to China's ascent will shape global dynamics for decades. For China, the challenge is internal and external, immediate and long-term, economic and political. It must sustain growth while avoiding inequality traps, maintain stability while embracing innovation, extend influence without provoking destructive confrontation, navigate global rules while asserting its own vision. The path forward is complex, yet the trajectory is clear. China has emerged from the shadows of history, humiliation, and poverty. It has mastered the levers of economic power, technological development, and strategic influence. It has integrated itself into the global system while retaining control over its destiny. Whether China will become the world's dominant superpower is not yet certain, but its rise is undeniable, and the forces behind it are formidable. The story of China is a story of transformation. It is a story of ambition guided by pragmatism. It is a story of endurance, resilience, and strategic vision. It is the story of an economic revolution that reshaped a nation and reverberated across the globe. From a poor agrarian society to a technological and industrial powerhouse, China has demonstrated that deliberate planning, disciplined execution, and long-term vision can overcome centuries of obstacles. The rise of China is not just an economic story. It is a story of power, influence, and the redefinition of the world order. It challenges assumptions, inspires debate, and demands attention. As China moves forward, the world watches. The next chapters of this story will be written not only by policies and markets, but by innovation, diplomacy, and the ability to manage contradictions. One certainty remains. The rise of China has changed the world forever, and it will continue to do so in ways that are profound, complex, and unavoidable. The economic revolution is not over. It evolves, adapts, and expands. China is no longer a follower. China is a contender. China is a superpower in the making. The world has witnessed one of the most extraordinary transformations in human history, and the story is still unfolding. China's rise is more than an economic story. It is a tale of vision, resilience, and strategy, showing how a nation can transform itself from the margins of history into a global powerhouse, mastering industry, technology, and influence, while maintaining stability and control, proving that growth alone is not enough, and that real power demands planning, innovation, and foresight. The world is watching China shape the rules of the 21st century, and its journey is far from over. If you want to explore more stories of nations, economies, and the forces that shape our world, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what fascinates you most about China's rise, and what lessons we can learn from its transformation. The story of the world is still being written. Stay curious, stay informed, and join us on this journey. Subscribe now, and let's continue exploring history together.